Amelia once believed that love was unbreakable. She thought marriage was a sacred bond, a promise too strong to ever shatter. But one decision, one reckless moment, was all it took to destroy the man who trusted her most. She had believed she could hide it, bury it beneath silence and excuses. Yet betrayal has claws. It always drags itself into the light. This is the story of how Amelia broke her husband's heart, how a single choice unraveled everything they built, and how the shadow of that mistake still follows her everywhere she goes. She had grown up in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where neighbors exchanged smiles across white fences and marriages seemed to last forever. Her husband, Ethan, had been her childhood friend. They had walked to school together, shared lunch sandwiches, and even promised in their teenage years that they would always stay in each other's lives. When they finally married, it felt less like a beginning and more like a continuation of something eternal. Ethan was everything she had ever wanted: gentle, patient, and hardworking. Ethan never raised his voice, never left her wondering if she mattered. He woke early, kissed her forehead, and carried himself through life as though kindness was stitched into his very being. Amelia thought she loved him as deeply as he loved her. For years, she convinced herself that was enough. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. After nearly 10 years together, the cracks began to show, not in Ethan, but in her. She had begun to feel restless, questioning whether the life they had built was enough. Ethan worked long hours, often sacrificing his own rest to give them everything they needed. She should have admired him for it, but instead she began resenting the loneliness. That loneliness carved a hollow space inside her, a space that should have been filled with patience and gratitude, but it filled with doubt. She began seeking validation outside their home. Social media became her escape, a place where strangers' compliments sparked like tiny lights in her darkness. She didn't realize those small sparks were setting fire to her marriage. It was during that time she met someone new, not in person but online. His words flattered her. His attention soothed the places Ethan's busy schedule couldn't reach. It started innocently, conversations about books, movies, dreams. But innocence blurred quickly into temptation. Looking back now, she could see how fragile love becomes once shadows are let in. The messages became late-night chats. The chats became secrets. And secrets, once given a place to hide, grow roots that are hard to tear out. At first, Amelia told herself it was harmless. She convinced herself Ethan would never have to know, that it was only words and nothing more. But betrayal rarely begins as something grand. It begins with small choices. Choices that pile up until their weight crushes the heart they betray. The man on the other end of those messages gave her something she foolishly thought she was missing: attention without responsibility, affection without sacrifice. He told her she was beautiful, that she deserved more. And, slowly, she started to believe him. While Amelia was busy feeding her ego, she didn't notice how Ethan was quietly breaking himself for them. He stayed late at work, not to escape her, but to build a future they could be proud of. He skipped his own dreams so hers could survive. He carried burdens she never saw because he didn't want her to feel their weight. The contrast between his silent sacrifices and her reckless choices only became clear when it was already too late. Love had been slipping through her fingers like sand. One evening, Ethan came home earlier than usual. He was exhausted, his shirt wrinkled and tie loose, yet his eyes still lit up when he saw her. "I brought your favorite," he said softly, holding out a slice of chocolate cake. It was such a simple gesture, one that should have reminded her why she loved him. But instead of warmth, guilt clawed at her chest. She forced a smile, but it felt like glass cracking on her lips. She could hardly meet his eyes, afraid they might see what she was hiding. The truth didn't stay buried for long. Ethan wasn't looking for it. He trusted her too much to even consider betrayal. But lies have a way of unraveling themselves. A message she forgot to delete. A notification she didn't silence. And suddenly, the world they built was hanging by a thread. Amelia still remembers the look on Ethan's face when he saw it. It wasn't anger at first. It was disbelief, the kind that carves itself so deep into a soul it never fully heals. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the evidence of her betrayal. His lips parted, but no words came, as though language had abandoned him. Amelia wanted to explain, to justify, to paint her actions as mistakes born from loneliness, not selfishness. But betrayal doesn't come with explanations that matter. To Ethan, the love he poured into her had been repaid with disloyalty. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. And when he finally spoke, his voice was broken and quiet, each word carrying the weight of 1,000 shattered promises. "Why, Amelia?" Ethan whispered, his voice cracking like thin glass. "Why would you do this to us?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. No excuse could untangle what she had done. She stared at the floor, wishing the earth would swallow her whole. Ethan stood there, eyes wide and hollow, like he was staring at a ghost. She tried to step closer, to touch him, but he flinched as if her fingers were fire. That small recoil burned more than any shouting could have. She realized then that she had become someone he no longer recognized. In that moment, she watched the man she loved crumble. His shoulders, once broad and steady, slumped as if the foundation of his world had been ripped away. His eyes, once warm and filled with laughter, now stared at her with unfamiliar coldness. "I gave you everything," he murmured, almost to himself, and it still wasn't enough. The words pierced her like knives. Tears blurred her vision, but Ethan's eyes stayed dry, too stunned to cry. It was the silence between them that hurt most, the silence of something dying. That night, Ethan packed a bag. He didn't yell. He didn't curse her name. He didn't even slam the door. He simply moved with quiet precision, like a man folding the remnants of his life into a suitcase. Amelia stood frozen, clutching the edge of the table as if it could hold her together. "Ethan, please don't go," she whispered. He paused by the door, looked at her one last time, and said only, "I don't know who you are anymore." Then he left, and the echo of the closing door felt like a final heartbeat. The house became a graveyard after that. Every room was haunted by memories of Ethan. The echo of his laughter in the kitchen, the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, the warmth of his presence in the bed they once shared. She wandered through the silence like a ghost herself, tracing her fingers over the framed photos of their happier days. She whispered apologies to the empty rooms, knowing they could never reach him. She had destroyed not only his trust, but the entire world they had built together. Friends tried to comfort her, but their words fell hollow. "People make mistakes," they said gently. "He'll forgive you someday." But they hadn't seen the look on Ethan's face. They hadn't heard the crack in his voice when he asked her why. They didn't understand that betrayal isn't just a wound. It's a scar that reshapes everything it touches. Forgiveness, she knew, was not guaranteed. And even if it came, the version of their love she had shattered could never be rebuilt into what it once was. Nights stretched endlessly. Amelia would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every choice that had led her here. She remembered the first message she sent to the stranger online, the thrill that had rushed through her like stolen air. Now it all felt poisoned. She deleted the messages, the account, the entire false world she had created, but the damage remained, etched into Ethan's heart like a scar she couldn't erase. She hated herself for craving something as fleeting as attention while she had held something as rare as his love. Weeks passed, and she saw Ethan once, briefly, at a local cafe. He was sitting alone, reading, his hair a little longer, his face thinner. When he looked up and their eyes met, there was a flicker of something, pain, maybe, or just recognition, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He gave her a small, polite nod, then returned to his book as if she were a stranger. That single glance hurt more than if he had shouted. It told her he was learning to live without her. Amelia stayed rooted to the spot, watching him quietly from across the cafe, fighting back tears. She wanted to go to him, to fall to her knees and beg for another chance. But she knew another chance would mean asking him to rebuild on broken ground. She had stolen his safety, his certainty, and no amount of apologies could return them intact. She left quietly before he could see her cry, her chest aching with the weight of everything she had thrown away. She returned to their old house that night, and for the first time, she said the words aloud to the dark. "I betrayed him." Her voice echoed through the empty rooms. There was no one left to argue, no one to soften the truth. She had loved Ethan, truly, but she had also hurt him beyond repair. That realization sank into her like cold water. She wrapped herself in one of his old sweaters and sat on the floor, sobbing until the dawn light crept through the curtains like an accusation. In time, Amelia began to understand something she had been too blind to see. Betrayal doesn't just break the person you hurt. It also breaks you. Piece by piece, it takes everything good you believed about yourself and turns it into ash. Every memory of Ethan became double-edged. His laughter, his touch, his unwavering devotion, all now reminders of the man she had lost and the woman she had failed to be. She was still breathing, still living, but in all the ways that mattered, she had lost herself too. Days blurred together like smudged ink. Amelia wandered through her routines like an empty shell. Wake, work, sleep, repeat, though none of it felt real anymore. Sometimes she caught herself reaching for her phone to text Ethan, only to stop mid-gesture, remembering he no longer belonged to her world. The silence he left behind was louder than any words could be. It hummed in the walls, echoed in her chest. She had once thought losing him was impossible. Now she understood how easily love can dissolve when trust is broken. Her parents visited one Sunday afternoon, hoping to lift her spirits. Her mother, a gentle woman with silver hair, brought homemade soup and tried to fill the air with small talk. Her father simply sat, eyes scanning her with quiet concern. "You can't stay like this forever, Millie," her mother said softly, using the childhood nickname that now felt foreign. "You have to try to forgive yourself." Amelia smiled faintly, but her voice was flat. "How do you forgive yourself for burning down your own home?" No one had an answer. Later that evening, her best friend Claire came by. Claire had always been blunt, never one to sugarcoat truths. She sat cross-legged on the couch and studied Amelia carefully. "You know," Claire said, "you can either drown in this guilt or start swimming out of it. Ethan's gone. You can't fix him, but you can fix you." Amelia shook her head. "I don't even know who me is anymore." Claire placed a hand over hers. "Then that's where you start. Find out who you are without breaking someone else to do it." That conversation lingered in Amelia's mind long after Claire left. She realized that for years, she had defined herself through Ethan, through his love, his care, his steady presence. Without him, she felt like a hollow outline. But maybe she thought that was part of the problem. She had expected Ethan to fill every crack inside her, and when he couldn't, she had gone searching elsewhere. If she was ever going to heal, she would have to learn how to be whole on her own. She started small. She cleaned the house, not to erase him, but to reclaim it. She opened the windows and let sunlight spill across the dusty floor. She packed away some of the photos, leaving only one on the mantel, their wedding picture. She wasn't ready to hide it completely. Each small task was like stitching herself back together. It hurt, but it also reminded her she was still alive. Broken, yes, but breathing. And maybe breathing was enough for now. Amelia also returned to painting, something she had abandoned early in their marriage. She bought fresh brushes and tubes of color and set up a small easel by the window. At first, her hands trembled so badly that she could barely hold the brush. But slowly, the strokes grew steadier. The canvases filled with chaotic swirls of color. Pain, grief, longing, but they were hers. Creating something from her own hands felt like reclaiming a part of herself she had forgotten existed long before the betrayal. One night, while washing the paint off her fingers, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. There were dark circles under her eyes and hollows where her laughter used to live. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. It wasn't a promise, just a fragile hope. She had shattered Ethan's heart and lost herself in the process, but maybe she could still crawl out of the wreckage. Not to win him back, but to remember she was more than her mistakes. Weeks later, she saw Ethan again, unexpectedly, at a bookstore. He was standing by the history section, flipping through a hardcover. Amelia froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. He looked different, calmer, somehow, as if life had gently rearranged itself around him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan looked up and saw her. His expression flickered, surprise, then guarded politeness. "Hello, Amelia," he said, voice even. She managed a soft, "Hi, Ethan." Her hands ached to reach for him, but she kept them at her sides. They stood there in the quiet hum of the store, surrounded by unread words. "How are you?" she asked cautiously. Ethan closed the book and placed it back on the shelf. "I'm better," he said. His voice was steady, but there was still a shadow in his eyes. "And you?" She hesitated. "Trying," she whispered. There was so much she wanted to say, apologies, confessions, pleas, but none of them seemed right anymore. The past couldn't be undone, only carried. And he had clearly chosen to carry his without her. "Take care of yourself, Amelia," Ethan said gently, and with that, he walked away, leaving her standing amidst the quiet rows of books. She watched him go until he disappeared around the corner, and it felt like watching the last page of a beloved story turn. There would be no sequel, no grand reconciliation, just endings. But as Amelia stepped out of the bookstore, she realized something quietly powerful. She was still standing, still breathing, and maybe that was where her story had to begin again. That night, Amelia sat by her window with the wedding photo on her lap. The two smiling faces inside the frame felt like strangers from another lifetime. She traced Ethan's grin with her fingertip and whispered, "I'm sorry," to the glass. The apology wasn't for him anymore. It was for herself, for the girl she had been when she made the choices that burned her world down. She knew Ethan might never hear those words, but she needed to say them out loud, if only to start forgiving the broken parts of her own heart. The next morning, she signed up for a grief support group. It wasn't about death, not technically, but she figured loss was loss. The first day, she sat silently while others spoke, an old man mourning his wife, a young woman healing from a broken engagement, a mother who lost her child. Their pain filled the room like soft rain. When her turn came, her voice trembled. "I didn't lose him," she whispered. "I threw him away." No one judged her. They just nodded quietly, and for the first time, she didn't feel alone. As weeks passed, the group became her anchor. They listened without flinching when she spoke about Ethan, about the betrayal, the guilt, the hollow nights. One woman squeezed her hand after a meeting and said, "You're not your worst mistake." The words lodged deep in Amelia's chest. She had spent so long believing she was nothing but the sum of her failure. Maybe, she thought, she could be something more if she dared to believe she still deserved it. She started journaling again, pouring her tangled thoughts onto paper. The pages became her confessional, her quiet witness. Some nights, she wrote letters to Ethan that she never sent. Letters where she told him how much she had loved him, how sorry she was, how she hoped he found joy again. She ended every letter the same way. "You were the best part of me. I'm sorry I didn't see it until you were gone." The act of writing didn't erase the past, but it stopped it from swallowing her whole. Gradually, the crushing weight on her chest eased enough for her to breathe without breaking. She started jogging in the mornings, letting the cold air sting her lungs awake. She planted flowers in the backyard, bright marigolds and wild daisies. It felt strange, tending to life while she was still grieving, but the blooms reminded her that broken soil could still grow something beautiful. Maybe she could too. Maybe she didn't have to stay the villain of her own story forever. One Saturday, Claire dragged her to an art exhibit downtown. The gallery buzzed with soft music and murmured conversations. Amelia stood before a painting of a cracked vase filled with wildflowers and felt tears sting her eyes. The cracks weren't hidden. They were gilded with gold, like veins of sunlight. "It's called kintsugi," the artist explained nearby. In Japan, they mend broken pottery with gold to show that its scars are part of its beauty. Amelia carried that thought home like a fragile treasure. That night, she painted her own cracked vase. Bold golden lines traced the fractures, bright against the dark background. When she finished, she stared at it for a long time. It was imperfect, jagged, and utterly hers. For the first time in months, she smiled without forcing it. The painting wasn't just art. It was a mirror. She was cracked, yes, but maybe she could be beautiful in spite of it, or even because of it. In the following weeks, Amelia applied for a job at a local art studio. The owner, a kind-eyed woman named Rosa, reviewed her portfolio and said, "You've been through something, haven't you?" Amelia hesitated, then nodded. "It shows in your work," Rosa said softly. "There's pain, but there's hope too. We could use that here." For the first time since Ethan left, someone saw her not as what she had done, but as what she could become. She accepted the offer with trembling hands. Her first day at the studio felt like stepping into sunlight after years underground. She painted beside strangers who soon became friends. They laughed, shared snacks, and splattered colors on canvases like children. Amelia found herself laughing too, real laughter that bubbled up from somewhere unbroken. It didn't erase the past, but it reminded her there was still a future waiting for her if she chose to walk into it. Every brushstroke felt like a step forward, away from the ruins of who she had been. One evening, as she locked up the studio, she caught her reflection in the window. She looked different, still fragile, but no longer shattered. She whispered to her reflection, "You're not ruined. You're just rebuilding." For a moment, she imagined what Ethan might say if he saw her now. Maybe he would still walk away. Or maybe he would just nod, quietly proud that she had survived. Either way, she knew she wasn't doing this for him anymore. She was doing it for herself, and that had to be enough. By the time autumn arrived, Amelia had grown comfortable with her new rhythm. She woke early, painted at the studio, and spent her evenings walking through the park with a sketchbook tucked under her arm. She still thought of Ethan, but the thoughts no longer crushed her. They came like echoes, soft, distant, bittersweet. Sometimes she would imagine him laughing somewhere, maybe falling in love again. The thought hurt, but it also brought her peace. He deserved happiness, even if it wasn't with her. One chilly evening, she sat on a park bench sketching the fading sunset when a stranger approached. "That's beautiful," he said, pointing to her drawing. He was tall, with warm eyes and an easy smile. His name was Lucas. They talked about art and music, about how silence could be comforting instead of heavy. It was just a simple conversation, but it left her strangely lighter, like a window had cracked open in a room she didn't know was suffocating her. She caught herself smiling the whole walk home. Over the next few weeks, she and Lucas crossed paths often, sometimes at the park, sometimes at the cafe near the studio. He always greeted her with a grin and some small joke that drew a reluctant laugh from her. He never asked about her past, and she didn't offer it. Their conversation stayed simple, gentle, and fleeting. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen without being studied, spoken to without being judged. It was both comforting and terrifying. Claire noticed a change in her one afternoon. "You're glowing," she teased, leaning on Amelia's kitchen counter. Amelia rolled her eyes, but a smile tugged at her lips. "It's not like that," she said. "He's just kind." Claire arched an eyebrow. Sometimes kindness is where love begins. The thought made Amelia's chest tighten. She wasn't ready to love again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the part of her that had been frozen for months was beginning to thaw, and she couldn't pretend she didn't feel it. One Saturday, Lucas invited her to a local art fair. She almost said no, afraid of what it might mean, but something in his hopeful smile made her agree. The fair was alive with color paintings, sculptures, music, laughter. Amelia felt like a child again, wide-eyed and curious. Lucas bought her a paper flower crown and placed it on her head with a mock bow. "Queen of the fair," he declared. She laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that startled her. For a moment, the weight of the past slipped off her shoulders that night as she lay in bed. Amelia stared at the ceiling and thought about how far she had come. Months ago, she could barely breathe without guilt crushing her. Now she was smiling again, even laughing. She still carried her regret, but it no longer dragged her under. It walked beside her, quiet and small, a reminder of who she had been. and who she refused to be again. She realized healing wasn't about forgetting Ethan or erasing her mistake. It was about choosing not to let it define her forever. The next morning, she painted a new piece. It was different from anything she had done before. A woman standing in a field of broken glass, her feet bleeding, but her face turned toward the sunrise. The woman was wounded, scarred, yet still standing. When she finished, she stepped back and whispered, "That's me." Rosa, the studio owner, paused behind her and studied the painting. "It's powerful," she said softly. "She's not healed, but she's unbroken." Amelia felt tears sting her eyes. For the first time, she believed that was true. A few days later, Lucas stopped by the studio. He stood quietly, watching her paint. "You look peaceful when you do that," he said. Amelia smiled faintly. "It's the only time my head goes quiet." He nodded, then held out a small sketchbook. "Thought you might like this. For new beginnings." The gesture was simple, but made her chest ache. She accepted it with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't press for more. He just smiled and left, leaving the studio door swinging gently behind him. That evening, Amelia sat on her bed, holding the empty sketchbook. She traced its cover, thinking of how full her life once was and how empty it had become. And now, slowly, it was filling again. Not with Ethan, not with another love story, but with herself, with color and laughter and air that didn't taste like guilt. She opened the book to the first page and wrote just 2 words, "Still here." It wasn't much, but it was everything. Proof that she had survived her own storm. She closed the sketchbook and set it on her nightstand, then turned off the light. The darkness didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like rest. Tomorrow, she would paint. She would laugh. Maybe she would meet Lucas for coffee. Maybe not. The future didn't scare her anymore. It was no longer a punishment waiting to happen. It was a blank canvas, waiting for her to choose the colors. And for the first time since Ethan walked out, Amelia was ready to hold the brush again. Spring came quietly, like a soft apology from the world. The garden Amelia had planted months before burst into color. Marigolds swaying in the breeze, daisies stretching toward the sun. She often sat among them with her sketchbook, drawing petals and shadows, the smell of earth grounding her. She no longer waited for Ethan to appear at the gate. The ache of his absence had dulled into something gentler, almost tender. She could think of him now without shattering, and that felt like victory. One afternoon, she ran into Ethan again, purely by chance, at a farmer's market. He was buying oranges, his sleeves rolled up, sunlight catching the gold strands in his hair. For a moment, she simply watched him, her heart calm in a way she hadn't expected. When he noticed her, surprise flickered across his face, followed by a small, quiet smile. "Hi, Amelia," he said softly. "Hi," she replied. They stood there, 2 people who had once been everything to each other, now just 2 souls who had survived the same storm. They spoke briefly about small things, the weather, the market, their work. Not once did they speak of the past. There was no anger in his eyes now, no hurt, just a distant kind of peace. When they parted, Ethan said, "I hope you're happy." The words didn't sound bitter. They sounded sincere. And for the first time, Amelia didn't feel the urge to apologize. "I hope you are too," she said. He nodded once, then walked away, and she didn't chase him. She simply stood still, breathing in the sunlight. That evening, she told Claire about the encounter. "Did it hurt?" Claire asked gently. Amelia thought for a long moment, then shook her head. "No, it didn't hurt. It just closed." Claire smiled softly. "Then maybe that's what healing feels like." Amelia realized she was right. Healing didn't roar or announce itself. It whispered. It arrived in quiet moments like that, when the past finally loosened its grip and she could stand in the present without trembling. The next week, Rosa invited Amelia to display her paintings at a local gallery event. Panic fluttered in her chest at first, but she accepted. The night of the exhibition, she stood among her canvases, surrounded by the buzz of strangers admiring her work. She felt exposed and proud all at once. These paintings were her story, messy, scarred, radiant. People asked about her process, her inspirations, and for the first time, she spoke not as someone broken, but as an artist who had rebuilt herself from shards. After the event, Lucas found her outside beneath the string lights. "You were incredible," he said. Amelia laughed softly. "I didn't faint, so I'll call that a win." He smiled. "You know, you don't have to carry it all alone anymore." His words were gentle, not a demand, just an offering. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she simply leaned her head against his shoulder, letting herself rest. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was trust, and that was enough for now. In the following days, Amelia began to feel something new blooming quietly inside her. Not guilt, not grief, but peace. She no longer felt defined by her betrayal. It would always be part of her story, but not the ending. She had been the girl who broke someone's heart, yes. But she had also become the woman who stitched her own heart back together, thread by trembling thread. She had learned how to stand in the ruins and plant something beautiful. She often wondered if Ethan had done the same. If he had found love again, if he laughed freely, if he finally slept without the shadow of her betrayal. She hoped so. She knew they could never go back, and she no longer wanted to. The past belonged behind them. What mattered was that they had both survived it. Some stories don't need reunions. Some just need release. And she had finally, fully let him go. On a warm Saturday morning, Amelia walked to the park with her sketchbook. Children were flying kites, couples were laughing on picnic blankets, and sunlight spilled like honey over everything. She sat on the grass, opened a blank page, and began to draw. Not from pain this time, but from wonder. Her lines danced across the paper like quiet joy. She didn't know where life would take her next. But for the first time, the uncertainty felt like freedom, not fear. As she packed her things and stood to leave, a breeze lifted her hair and made the trees whisper above her. She closed her eyes, breathing it in. She was not who she had been. She was not who she used to pretend to be. She was simply Amelia, scarred, healing, whole. And as she walked away, the world felt wide open again, like a blank canvas waiting for her hands.